Welcome back, everyone, to our fourth of five workshops. So we're really nearly there. And let's first take a quick review of our progress on the game that we are making so far. So in the play mode, so far we have a player and we have one enemy on the screen. We have some enemy AI, and we can shoot, and the enemy can also shoot. So right away, you can notice a problem is that whenever the enemy shoot or we shoot the enemy, the bullet just go right through our player or the enemy. So we need to fix that, and we need to have actual collisions between the bullet and the other objects in the game. So so let's do that real quick. So we have a bullet, like a prefab bullet prefab. So it's essentially an object that can be spawned into the game. Now, if you select the prefab in the project panel, you can see like all the properties that you would normally have for a game object in the inspector. And what you can actually do is you can edit them like right here. And you can also add or remove components to a prefab the way that you would in a game object. So I select my bullet here, and if I go to the scene view, it's just my game, but there's a button here that says open. So if I click that, it actually it enters a different mode. I think it's called like prefab mode, where if you zoom out, the only thing that's in the scene view right now is our bullet prefab, because we're only editing this prefab only. So it enters this exclusive mode that we can only edit our bullet. So in order for our bullet to collide with the player or the enemy, of course, we're going to need a collider component. So let's add a component. And yes, we want a box collider 2D. And this added the box collider 2D to our bullet, but the size of it is not quite right. You can see the size is the thin line, green line right here. Is not what we want to collide with our player. We want we want it to be thinner, so we decrease the X size to about 0.5. That looks good. And now that we have the bullet collider, and now we should check the collision. So when we shoot the bullet from our player, it should collide with our enemy, and our enemy should take some damage. And and the bullet should also disappear, right? We should destroy it. So let's do that through scripts. So I'm going to go to my code editor here. And so we're going to add a new function, and it's actually a Unity event function. So let me just add it. So void on collision, enter 2D. And the parameter would be collision 2D. And I'm just going to call it other. So what this function does is that it is a Unity event function. So it is similar to start and update and fixed update, where it will be called automatically by Unity. So you don't have to call it yourself. And it's also very important that you have the right name and the right parameter for it to work. And what this function, when this function will be called is, when we have a bullet and it collides with one of our objects here, when it collides with our player. Our player also has a box collider, so they can both collide with each other. And so that's when this function will be called. Now, when a bullet collides with an object, and that object will be this other object. So this other can be our player, can be our enemy, can be, other things. So when you collide with other, what do we want to do? Well, the first thing we want to do is that we want to check which object did we collide with, right? So we'll check like whether we collided with a player or the enemy or what else. So in order to do that, Unity provides us with something called a tag system. So if I select my player here and I look at the top of the inspector, you can see that there's a tag. And if you click on this, expand it, it has many options. So if I click on player here, we can change the object tag to player. And this is very useful when we want to compare the tag in our project, in our scripts. So here in our on collision enter 2D, what we can do here is we can compare the tag of this other object here, and you can see that whether we collided with an enemy or a player. So let's set this tag system up real quick. So we go back into Unity, and let's change it back to untag here to show you the process. So if we click on this, again, we have a number of tags. These are actually like provided by Unity. And if you want to add a new tag, you can click here. I actually added enemy tag earlier to test it out, but you can remove it, and we can click on this plus button to add a new tag. So I'm just going to add the enemy tag again and save, and we added a tag. So if I go back to our player, and now we can just assign a tag to our objects. So we assign the player object, a player tag. So click the drop down menu and select player. And we do the same with our enemy, but this time instead of player, we assign the enemy tag. And that's it. So we have the tag assigned to our player and our enemies. So let's go into our scripts, and we're just gonna compare which tag this other object is having. So I'm actually going to use a switch statement because I think it looks cleaner. But you can use a if statement. Doesn't matter. So what do we want to switch, or what do we want to compare? Well, obviously the tag of other. So it would be other dot game object tag. And so we added the enemy tag and the player tag. So those will be the cases for our switch statements. So case first will be player. Print case enemy and break. And of course, our default case, I'm also going to break. So between here, when a bullet collide with our player, what do we want to do? Well, if you recall, in the player movement script, we actually have a method for tag damage. So what it does is decrease whatever damage that we took, and if the damage is too low, or then the player will simply die, and we destroy the player object. So in here, we can just say, well, obviously we can't say with player other dot take damage because this other is not of type player movement. But we can get the player movement from this other by saying other dot game object dot get component. And we want to get the player movement component. And now we can say take damage. And we want the player to take 1 damage per bullet. So to explain this once again, what we did is, so when the bullet collide with any object, say the player, right? We have this player as this other object here, but we don't know that it's a player. So we have to compare the tag, and we say, okay, if our tag is now player, we get the player component. So player, we have a player movement component. We get that component, and then from that component, we call a method take damage and apply damage to our player. And we essentially do the same thing for our enemy. We also have take damage and die. So we can say other that game object get component enemy and take damage. And we also want our enemy to take 1 damage per bullet. So save that and we go back into Unity. Of course, we will wait for it to compile. And when we run it, we'll actually run into kind of an interesting problem here. So let's wait for it to compile. And okay, let's run the game and see what is the problem that we will run into. So got the game started here, and if I click, okay. Okay, so I think that worked. So let's see. Okay, so the you probably have seen that when the bullets collide with either our enemy or our player, it bounces off and just go away. And we didn't actually destroy the bullet. So that's one thing that we need to do. And here, we don't care if it's the enemy or the player that we collided with. So we actually do that outside of the switch statement. And we just say destroy our game object. Save that, go back into Unity. And play the game. Let's see now if it works. So I'm clicking like hell right now, and you can see that there is a very serious problem that we run into here. So in our player here, right? So we spawn the bullet at the gunpoint right here. And what it actually does is that the bullet here, right? When we spawn it, the bullet will be somewhere around here. And you can actually see that the collider of the bullet is actually inside of the collider of our player object here. So what it actually does is that when you spawn, it will immediately, when you spawn the bullet, when you shoot, it will immediately say that the bullet is actually colliding with a player because it is. And it will destroy a bullet, it will apply damage, self-inflicting damage to our player. So that's actually a serious problem and we need to fix it. Well, how do we do that? Well, the first thing we can do is decreasing the size of our player collider because is the y-axis is actually quite large compared to our actual player ship. So on the box slider of our player, I'm gonna decrease it to 1.5. All right, so that matches our player better. But when we spawn the bullet at the gunpoint, you know, it's still clipping into our player collider. So we actually need to extend this gunpoint further up on the um, uh, on the y-axis. So now, when we shoot a bullet, the gunpoint is here, and the bullet will spawn here instead, and it will not, clip into our player anymore. So, and we apply this fix to our player. Let's apply this fix to our enemy as well. So we see that the box slider is also too large for the actual enemy ship. So let's change that to 1.5, and we move the gun point up a little bit so that the bullet doesn't detect the collision right after it's shot. So let's play the game and see whether we have fixed the issue. So shoot, and let's see. So it's not fixed yet. Let's see. We probably need to move this further. Yeah, let's see. We move the gun point up a little bit more. And see. All right, let's play the game again. So this is actually like a quite common thing in game development, just in general, that there's a lot of like just trying things out and see what sticks. Okay, so we see now that that's worked, and we successfully destroyed our enemy. So that's the thing about game development, not just in Unity, but it's like in general, where there's a lot of trial and error. You have to just try things out and then see what work and what doesn't. So yeah, it's a little insight there. Uh, and so we have the bullet colliding with our objects. And yeah, that is implemented. So what is the next thing that we should do? Let's see. So usually when we have like a game here, usually what we have is, so we have a game and we have our scripts, and the script will be like controlling different parts of a game. Uh, and we actually usually also have something called a game controller or game manager script. And what they are is essentially they control the like the overall behavior of the game. Like you have pausing the game and resuming the game, or you even want to quit the game. You need like a sort of master script to control the overall um, behavior of the game. So if you go to the tag system, you can see that there's a game controller tag in Unity that they provide us, like by default. I did not add, and that is for our game controller scripts to be assigned to, and we can like get it, and we can do different stuff with it. So let's add a script that will control a game. Let's go the way that we have always been creating scripts. Let's right click on the project, create, and we're going to have a C# script, of course, and I'm just going to call it game controller. And in order for this game controller script to actually be executed in our game, we actually need it to be attached to an object, to whatever object in the scene or in the game. Like we have the enemy script that is attached to our enemy. We have player script, the movement script attached to the player. In the same way, we need our game controller script to be attached to something in the game. And obviously, like you can just attach a player to like game controller or attach the game controller to our player. But that's not like a good organized way to do things. So what I usually do is I just create an empty game object, call it game controller, and just reset this position real quick. And if we go to the scene, you can see that there is an object created here. It doesn't render anything, it doesn't have anything. And that's the point. It doesn't have to have anything. It's just an empty game object that will sit there and control our game. So we have a game controller object, and we obviously want to attach our components. So just drag and drop from the game controller from the project to our inspector, and I let go, and we have a game control script attached to our game controller object. And this object will just sit here like a god, just watching over everybody. Okay, but what exactly will this game controller do? Well, one thing that it will do is will actually spawn enemies into our game. Because right now we only have one enemy, one player, and when the player shoot and kill the enemy, the game just it's just there. It's not a game anymore. So we would need to spawn in new enemies like randomly across the map, and that's the point of the game. The player will try to shoot and destroy those enemies. So let's go into our game controller script and implement that spawning behavior. So I'm going to go into my my code editor. Here we have, of course, a game controller script, and this is the template script that Unity has given us. So similar to how we shoot the bullet in our player here, we instantiate the bullet, like the position, a rotation, and we can do whatever we want with it. So in order to instantiate, we need a prefab. So here would be bullet, and in the game controller, we would need a prefab for the enemy. So let's do that. Public enemy, and I'm just gonna call it enemy prefab. And so when we spawn, I'm gonna go back into a player here, and we see that when we spawn, we also need a position and we need a rotation. So what? So here we also need a position and a rotation for our enemy, but we don't want to spawn our enemy at like a fixed position, right? We want to spawn it like randomly across the map, so that it's more dynamic for our game. So what I actually have is I'm going to have a vector2. So here, vector2, and this will be the minimum position that we can spawn our enemy. So I'm going to call it enemy spawn min position. Right. That is a long name, but I'm going to go with it. So it will be a new vector2. And here we can assign what is the minimum position that our enemy can spawn in. And if you recall, we actually did a very similar thing. In our enemy script, we have a min position and a max position. And these are for for the enemy to navigate across the our game map. So we're going to do a very similar thing here, is that we're going to actually copy these values, because our enemies, if the enemies cannot go further than these positions, then our enemies shouldn't be spawned further than these positions. So copy and paste. We have a min position. Obviously, we're going to have a max position. Private vector2 spawn max position. And I am going to copy and paste it again because I am too lazy. All right, paste. And there we go. Yeah. And so we have the position that we should spawn our enemy, and this position will be like randomized between the min and the max so that we can have like a random position. So in order to spawn the enemy, let's make a function to do that. So spawn, spawn enemy, just like that. And similar to how we spawn a bullet when a player shoots, we want to instantiate an object with a position and rotation. So let's do that. So we want to instantiate our enemy prefab, and we want to give it a position. And we have two like min and max position here, and we're just going to randomize this position. So I'm just gonna say new vector2, and in here will be first the x value of the spawn position. So let's randomize it. Random dot range from enemy spawn min position x and enemy spawn max position x. So that is the x-axis. Let's randomize in the y-axis. I'm just going to go to a new line so that it's not so cluttered. Here, random range enemy spawn min position, and now it's the y-axis, so dot y, and enemy spawn max position dot y. So we have our position and off, and finally we need a rotation. So for the rotation, I'm just say like we're gonna spawn with the default rotation. So I'll say quaternion dot identity. So quick recap: quaternion identity is basically a default rotation here, which is like 0, 0, 0, and we'll let our enemy AI decide like where it wants to rotate to when it's actually spawned into the game. And so we have the enemy spawn method here. We're not calling it. So, if we call it an update here, what it's actually going to do is it's actually going to spawn a new enemy like every frame. So when the game starts, our player will be like bombarded with like hundreds of enemies on the screen, which is not ideal. So what we want is we want to spawn an enemy and then wait for a little bit, and then spawn another enemy and then wait a little bit. And if this sounds familiar to you, it's because it is. We actually already did a very similar thing here with the enemy script, where we have the enemy shoot and then wait a little bit and then shoot again and then wait a little bit. So here we use something called invoke, and then with a delay time, basically. So it needs a shoot interval range, which is like how often should our enemy shoot the bullet. So we need something similar here. So, whoops. So here it is like a vector2 with the minimum time and maximum time. So it will shoot between 1 and 2 seconds, basically. So yeah, let's do a similar thing in our GameController script. So we're going to need a private vector2. Let's call it enemy spawn interval range, and it will be a new vector2. So how often should our game spawn a new enemy? Like just put in some number. I'm gonna say like between 1.5 and 3 seconds. So between 1.5 and 3 seconds, we're going to spawn a new enemy. And in our enemy script, on our enemy method here, we also want to call invoke. So invoke. And so, quick recap. Again, let's go into our enemy and we say invoke. It will take two parameters. First is a name of our method as a string. And second thing is what time should it delay this invoke. And here we randomize the time, which is the exact same thing that we're going to do. So let's see it. Invoke spawn enemy. So make sure you spell the name of the method right, or else it's not going to work. And here we also want to say random range. And we want to range between enemy spawn interval range x, which is the minimum value, and enemy spawn interval range, which is the maximum value. So yeah, and we also want to call it, go back into my enemy script again. We want to invoke this at the start of our function as well, at the start of our game as well. So I'm just going to copy this line and put it in start. And go into Unity, wait for it to compile. And a quick recap of what we just did here. So we instantiate an enemy prefab at a randomized position, and we want to keep doing this over and over again after like a delay. And so that's what we do here with the invoke. Let's go back into Unity. And GameController always remember to assign like the references that we have. And we have our enemy, and ideally when we start the game, we will not have any enemy on the screen. And similar to how we did with the bullet, what we need to do is we need to save this enemy as a prefab. So let's go into our prefab, save this enemy as a prefab. It turns green. We have a new prefab in our project panel, and safely delete this enemy from game. And we can assign this enemy to our game controller. And there we go. We assigned it. Let's put our player back the 0-0 position. All right. So now when we play the game, we should see that game controller will spawn in a new enemy like randomly at random time. So let's wait for it. Oh, there he is. And another enemy. Another enemy. Another enemy. There we go. So there's that. We our game controller spawning like enemies at random interval, and we can shoot and kill. And you can probably see that we have like a few errors here. And this is actually quite interesting because in our player script, in our enemy script, we have it so that it's always kind of look at the player, right? And yeah, so look at player. Let's see, look at player here. So it's player transform position. So, but what if the player has already like died? And well, what we should do then is we don't want our enemy to look at the player like anymore, because the player is already dead and we're basically looking at like a null thing. That's why it's giving us some errors. No, it's a very like easy fix. What we can do is just say player is null. We just return. Just don't do anything if the player has already been destroyed. And let's see what is the next thing that we can do for our game. So we can see that we actually have a very like compelling game with like enemies spotting and shooting and everything. But what we can do even more is that we can add like some resources to our player. So say player will have like health, and we already did that. But say the player can also have like score, have like ammo, how many bullets we can shoot, etc. So let's add some resources to our player. So to our player script up here, and we have like health, and maximum health is 5. Um, we can also have like ammo and maximum ammo. So let's see, private int ammo. And if you're not familiar with the term ammo, it's just like how many bullets you got to shoot. And we also have private int max ammo, which is 20. Yeah, let's put 20. So there you go. And we have ammo now. We have maximum ammo. Of course, at the start we want to maximize our ammo. So in the start method, I'm going to put ammo equals to max ammo. So when the players start the game, we always want them to start with the maximum number of ammo for the ship. Whenever we shoot a bullet, we want to decrease one from the ammo. And when our ammo is 0 or less than 0 even, well, we can't have ammo less than 0, but that's the thing that we should always check for in case of, like computer errors and stuff. We don't want to shoot, so let's do that. So let's here shoot, we instantiate a bullet, and we decrease one from the ammo. So ammo minus minus. And if you're not familiar with C sharp, what this just means is that ammo minus equals 1. And if you're also not familiar with this expression, what this means is ammo equals to ammo minus 1. So we just decrease 1 from player. And if we don't have any more ammo, say if ammo is less than equal to 0, we just don't do anything, return. And there we go. So, and we also need sort of a way to tell our player. Let's me go back into Unity to reload. We also need a way to tell our player how much health I have left, how much ammo I have left, because right now we're keeping track of it in here, but we don't tell our player, so our player doesn't actually know that. So in order to do that, we're going to use the Unity's UI. So if you've ever played, any game like first-person shooter or etc., we always have a UI to tell us the state of our ammo, the state of our game. Sometimes we can even have like a minimap, UI. So UI is very useful for conveying information that we cannot otherwise do it in the actual game. So how do I get started with UI in Unity? Well, the first thing you're going to need is a canvas object. Well, let's add that. So in our hierarchy, let's right click, and here we see that you have UI, and we can add like everything here, but this canvas always has to be presented. Whoops, I think I did that rather fast. Let's do that again. Right click, UI, and we have canvas here. So let's click on that to add a canvas. And we see that it's giving me the option to rename. Just go to UI. We also have an event system, and this is also like automatically added when we added the canvas. And this actually like handles when we add like buttons or interactive UI elements. this event system will handle all of that. For now, we don't want to mess with this event system. And so we have our UI, which is a canvas, and go into our scene view. You can see that if I double click on this, it zooms right out, and we have this like rectangle outline rectangle thing. So this is actually representing the entire screen of our game. So this is what the canvas look like. So here in our option, we have like different components for our canvas to work, and we generally like don't want to mess with these things because it's what Unity uh, defined as it will be best for our UI, and yeah, is generally should stay that way. Even though there's one thing here that we should change is the UI scale mode. So what is UI scale mode? Well, when you make a game, you know the UI may look good on like your computer, on your monitor, because you may have like a 1080p monitor, but when other people play your game, they don't always have a 1080p monitor. Maybe they have something lower, like 720p, or they have something higher, like a 4K screen, 4K TV. So what this UI scale mode is that it will define like how should your UI scale with the different screen sizes or screen resolutions. So it's default to constant pixel size, which is not what we want. So we click here, and we actually want scale with screen size. And what scale with screen size does is that as the screen of the user, of the player gets bigger, the UI also gets bigger, which is what we want. And here we have the reference resolution, which is like what resolution will we be like referencing or working with. So I generally put like 720, so 12, which is 1280 by 720 for the reference resolution, which is like a 16:9 aspect ratio. It's it's really up to your taste to put like whatever reference resolution you have. But I generally just put 720p so that it will scale up and down pretty okay. So that is like the scale mode for the UI. So we have our UI, and how do we represent like the health and the ammo, and obviously we also want a player to score, right? When we destroy an enemy, we can add some score to our game. So how do we represent these things? Well, yeah, we can go like the complicated route with like icons and sliders and stuff. But for now, when we're just getting started, let's just use all the things. So we can have like some text here up at the top, say current ammo like 20, current health is 5, score is 100, etc. So we have the ammo text, and you might have noticed that when we added the UI, when we added the text, it's actually under legacy. So I think this is because the new version of Unity, they deprecate the text, and you can see here they're actually using Text Mesh Pro as the new version. And when we're making a game, we actually should be using Text Mesh Pro. The legacy text is actually like a lot more simple, but Text Mesh Pro is a more advanced way of doing UI text. So maybe they really want us to use Text Mesh Pro. Anyway, let's do what they want and let's use Text Mesh Pro for that. So we're going to get rid of our ammo text here, and we will do what they want and use Text Mesh Pro. So right click and UI Text Mesh Pro here, and it will actually pop up this. Let's see, yeah, we named it ammo text, and it will pop up this window here because in order to use Text Mesh Pro, we actually need to import a few stuff. So let's just do what they want and click import here and wait for it to, import the different, assets that we need for Text Mesh Pro. Okay. So because I'm using actually a new version of Unity, it's 2021.2. So they're trying to move forward with Text Mesh Pro, and they're trying to deprecate the legacy text. So they're forcing us to use it, which I think is a good thing. But sometimes we just want to use the old text. They don't want us to. All right. So we have ammo text, and we have a very similar interface as our legacy text. And if I go to the UI, yes, so we have a new text here. And again, we will do the same thing that we did with our legacy text and change a few things. So the font size, I think 32 will work. And we actually want this color to be a white black one so that it would stand out with the background. And we're going to set the position and set the text. That's one. And if you notice, if you drag and drop the font into the font asset into this field here, it would actually not work because in Text Mesh Pro, fonts actually work a bit differently. So if you click this, we actually have this file here, this like the default font. And what Text Mesh Pro want us to do is that we don't just assign a font to this to the text. We actually need to create a font asset and then assign that font. So let's create that real quick. Let's go to Window, Text Mesh Pro, and Font Asset Creator. So click that, and we have this window. And again, this is like any other window in Unity. You can just put it anywhere. I usually just have it as a floating window because I just use them and then just close it. So here, so this is the interface for us to create a font asset. So I'm just going to drag and drop my font, the font that we downloaded at the start, to the source font file here, and click this button to generate the font. And it's done generating. I can save it. And this is the font that we can assign to our text. So save, and I just close it because we don't need it anymore. And we have this file. And this is the file that we can assign. And yes, it will work. So that's a bit more hassle than we need to with Text Mesh Pro. Unity forcing us to do that, but we have our Text Mesh Pro and we have the ammo text here. Let's go back into our scripts, and so text probably will not work because it's a different type of object, and we also need to add a namespace for this Text Mesh Pro, and it will be using TM. Let's see. It should work. Let's see. Whoops. So let's go into Unity and see if we still have the error with Text Mesh Pro. Okay, so we simply do not have an error if we added the using table. Okay, it's freaking me out with those red lines. Uh, anyway, let's create a public. I think it's called TMP asset ammo text. Let's see. So go into Unity and see if it works. Okay, so seemingly we do not have any errors from that. Okay, I just need the verification. So TMP asset is basically the text that we added here. You know, I know it's like different terminology, but it is what it is. And how do I control this? Well, what I can do is I can go into, so this is the ammo text. And I can just go into our update here, issue this here. And what I can just do is that I want this ammo text to display the current ammo that I have. So let's just say ammo text dot text equals. So it's going to be a string and it'll be ammo uh, here. And we want to display this like integer ammo here. So we can say the string plus and ammo dot to string. And we have to convert this ammo integer in to a string for this text to display properly. So that's why we're doing this to string here. Straightforward. And well, in our player, we made a reference to our ammo text, and we should and drop it into here. Okay, this doesn't work. Oh, let's debug it together. DMP asset, is it all caps? Is it all caps? I wonder. Suppose could not be found. Oh, they're changing it all the time. Hmm. TMP asset. You know what? This is, we will be solving this next week because I'm gonna need to do some researches with the changes that they've done to Unity. But let's pivot away from the text and let's talk about some of the other UI elements that we can add to the game. So here we have our game, and we actually there's a functionality that we want to add to our game, which is like pausing and like resuming the game. Right? So we're playing the game here, and when we press escape, that's normally the button for pause. We want to stop the game, and we want to stop the game, freeze it in time, and we press escape again, which is the convention for resuming. We start the game again, and everything resumes as normal. So there is actually a very handy way of doing that in Unity. So let's go in. Let's just remove this now. And game controller, a quick recap. Our game controller is like the master script and control everything in the game. So ideally, we want to control the pausing and resuming behavior of the game in our game controller script. So let's make a void for pausing the game. So void pause, and also one for resuming the game. So G. Sure. And we also want some booleans to check if whether our game is paused or not. So at the top here, I'm just going to add a boolean is pause, and it's going to be public. So is paused is going to be true when we pause the game, and it will be false when we, unpause the game or resume the game. And so in pause here, when we want to pause the game, what do we do? Well, again, we want to freeze everything in time, and there's actually a very cool way in Unity to do that, and that is set the time scale. So if you time dot time scale would be 0. So what this means is that everything in the game will just freeze. The entire game will just freeze. And we also want to set is paused to true, right? When we pause the game. And we want to do the opposite thing in resume. So here we want to set it back. So by default, our time scale is 1. So this is normal time, everything goes at the speed that we guided. And is pause will be false. Just like that. And so we have the two methods to pause and resume or unpause the game. We need to actually activate those methods via the player input. And similar to player movement with input, where is it? Get mouse button down here. Actually, now we want to get the keyboard button, right? So it's here, go in if input dot get key down, and this will get a keyboard input, but keyboard but input, and here key code dot, and you can put any key as a pause, but I'm gonna go with the convention and with the escape. So here escape. So when the player press escape, what do we do? Well, if we just pause the game, if we just pause the game, that would actually not the case, because what if the game is already paused and we want to hit escape to resume the game? Well, that is why this is paused boolean is used. So we'll say that if not is paused. So if so not if so the game is not paused, then we pause the game. So if you're not familiar with this notation, it's just the same as is pause equals to false. So it's the same thing, but shorter. We always like short things. And else, if the game is paused already, right? So we pause the game, we set is paused to true, and we resume. Save and go back into Unity. See if it works. Sure. So I'm going to hit play here. And so we have our player running around, and I'm going to press escape now. Okay, so as you can see, I pressed escape and everything just stopped. Except the player is still looking at the mouse, so that's one thing that we need to fix. It's very, very easy. But it's the behavior that we want, right? The player, I'm trying to move the player, it's not moving anymore. The enemy ship has frozen, and we're not spawning any new enemy, which is good. And if I press escape again, we resume as normal. So voila, that is the behavior that I want. let's fix the look at mouse real quick. So here we say that, right, look at mouse, right. So what we want here is we just check if is pause is true, right, from the game controller, and we just return. So if so, actually, first we need a reference to the game controller. So I'm gonna do it right here. So public game controller, just called game controller. So here we check if game controller dot is paused. So if the game is currently paused, then we don't want to look at the mouse, right? Just return. And we have, our pause and resume behavior. Now, what we also want is when we pause the game, we want to have like a little menu with some buttons for us to resume the game from the buttons. So what we can do is under our UI here, let's add an image that will cover the entire screen when our game is paused. So let's go into our UI and let's add UI image. And its image, let's click pause menu. And so you can see that there is a white square on our screen here. And what we want is we want this square to cover the entire screen. And we also want it to be rather like semi-transparent. We don't want it to just be like all white. So let's configure that. We can set an object to cover the entire UI. It's actually very easy. The way that we do, it's the same way that we do with like our text. And here is that we click on this button here, and there is an option. If you hold Alt on the keyboard, there's an option for covering the entire screen. So if I click this, now the image is like covering the entire screen. All right. So let's make it rather like transparent so that we can see through it. We can definitely tell that there is something between us and the game, but we can also see through. So let's configure our color. Again, the alpha value is the visibility of our image. So I just decrease it to about 100, 120. Let's do that. And we can see through this image, but we can clearly tell that there is something between us and the actual game. And let's just add some text. So UI, like Smash Bros, why not? Text. And we want to say that the game is paused. So pause. And we want some flag text, and we want our font, just like we did with the Apple text. And so the text by default is at the center of our screen, which is kind of what we wanted for this text, but we want to also align it to the middle. So I just click these two buttons here to align it right at the center. Right. And you know what? Let's make this a little bit bigger. 54. Okay, good. So what we want now is we want to make a reference to this pause menu. And whenever we pause, we want to enable this object. And when we don't pause it, when we resume, we want to disable this object and have the game, function as normal. So let's do that through a script. So we're going to do that in our game controller, and let's make a reference to that. Let's do it public. Just go to call it game object pause menu. And what do we want with this pause menu? Well, we can in Unity here, we can enable and disable an object when we want to through script. That's very cool. So let's do that. So when we pause the game, we want to enable the pause menu, right? So we have the pause menu set active, and this will set this game object to is whether it's active or not in the scene. So here it is currently active. I uncheck this box. It's not active anymore. We cannot see it anymore. So and now it's active again. So that's what this code is doing. So set active, and we want to set to true. And we will do the exact opposite in resume. Or menu dot set active to false. And what we also need to do is that we need to set active false when we start the game, because we don't always start with, with our game being paused. We start with our game being played at normal. So we put it in start, and so we put it in start here. So when we start the game, the pause menu will just be inactive, basically, until we pause it, and it will be active, and then the rest will be controlled by our pause and resume function. So we have GameController here, and we made a reference to our pause menu. So let's drag and drop our pause menu in there and play the game and see for ourselves. So let's see. Right. We also forgot to reference the game controller in our player script. So just drag and drop the game controller in here, save that, and now let's play. It's something I always forget to do. All right, so you can see the pause menu is currently inactive. We can see our game as normal, and now if I pause it, our pause menu is active now. Everything is frozen. We have this thing here. And if I unpause the game, the pause menu disappeared, and our game resumes at normal. So that's pretty good, but we want to have a pause menu here, and we want like some button here to actually resume the game through that button as well, right? So let's go in here, let's right click UI, and let's add a button. So button, so it automatically add us a button, and I'm just gonna call it resume. And see, in our scene, we have a button here. So let's configure it. We see that by default, it adds a text to our button, and we can remove it if we want to. If our button is like an icon, that's a very obvious icon, and we don't need the text, but we'll keep the text here, and we just configure it the same way that we did with our other. So I can show up in our font, and size, it's about 32. Yeah, that looks good. And we can clearly see that the text of the button is covering up the pause text. So I'm just going to move it down a little bit to minus 100. Yeah, that looks good. And so you can see that, this button, it looks good, but it's kind of weird. Like, why is it so thin and long? So let's configure the height to be somewhere about 60. Yeah, so that's a bigger one. And yeah, the text should be resumed. Whoops. Resume. Right. So now we have this button here. and it says resume. So, the player will assume that when you click on this button, the game will resume as normal when you're pausing. So how do we tell a button what it should do when we click on it? Well, if you look here, under the button component, we have this these different thing here, and you see in a minute, it's actually like defined like how a button behave when we click on it. Just the color and the visualize of what it means. But what we're interested in now is this on click here. So we can actually like add different functions that we have created when the button is clicked. So when this resume button is clicked, what we want to do is in our game controller script, we have a void for resume. So we want to execute this method or function here, right? So how do we do that? Well, let's click on this add button here. Yeah. So it's asking for an object and it's asking for a function. So what does this mean? Well, an object is like, are the objects that we have in the screen or we have in the scene. My bad. And the function is the different functions that we have attached to that object. So let's put in our game controller because game controller script is attached to the game controller object. So I just drag and drop my game control script in here. And for the function thingy, if you click on this drop down, you see game object, transform, and game controller. So in here, we can see that we have a transform component on our game controller object, and we also have a game controller script on our game controller object. So this is what we want to access, right? So in our resume button here, game controller, and you see that there's a different a bunch of like methods that we can click and we can set the behavior, but we're not seeing pause or resume or the functions that we have created for our game controller script. Why is that? Well, if you look at a game controller script, we have pause, resume, spawn enemy, etc. But these are private functions, right? So in order for it to show up in the list, we actually need to make this public. So I'm just gonna make a resume public here. Go back into Unity. And okay, so resume button. And here, if I click on this drop down now, expand on the game controller, you can see that there we go. We have a resume button, resume function. And I click on this, and this will now tell Unity that if if the player click on this button, let's do whatever we do in this resume function, which is resume the game. And let's try this out. So we have game button has no one here. I'm gonna pause it, and we have this resume button. Click on it. We resume the game. Let's do it again. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And yeah, that looks good. Let's add another button that when we pause the game, we want to say we want to exit the game, we want to quit the game. So I'm just going to go into our resume button here, and what I'm going to do because I'm too lazy is I'm going to duplicate this object. So Control D on the keyboard to duplicate. I'm going to rename this to exit button. And it's covering up. So I'm going to move it down here, minus 200. All right. And the text here will say exit. And we need a function to exit the game. So let's go into our game controller. Let's make a public void called exit. And in order to exit the game in Unity, it's very simple. Just call application.quit. Yeah, with a capital Q, mind you. Yes, the spelling is actually important, and we need to make this function public as well. So go back into Unity. Now we have a public function for exiting the game. We just need to do the same thing that we did for resume, that is telling the button that, hey, when I click this, let's exit the game. So here, so select exit button, and here, game controller, and exit. And well, now if I actually play and click on exit, it will actually not do anything because I'm inside the Unity editor. So, it would make sense for like Unity to actually quit the Unity editor when I exit the game here. But if you actually make this project like an executable, when the next week when we build it into an actual executable and we can play it in Windows or any other computer, well, when we click on exit, it will quit the application. So we have pause menu, and we actually also have, so when a player die here, we just destroy a player. What we want, the behavior that we want is actually um, we would do something quite similar to pause, is that we also have a menu, but this menu is game over. Right? Just have a game over menu, and then two buttons will be restart or exit. So let's do something similar to that. Here in game controller, we have is pause, right? Let's do also make move is game over. So this will, control whether a game is over or not. And we actually need to make modifications to this here because we want to hit escape when the game is not paused to pause the game. But what if the game is already like over? What if our player has already died? We don't need to pause the game then. So here we actually want to modify this. So if it is paused and if it's not paused and not game, whoops, is game over, then we pause the game. And else if the game is paused and the game is not over, we resume the game. So yeah, we have scripts here to control it. Obviously, we need a function to handle the game over. So here, public void game over. And set is game over to true. And we also need like a menu to set active, right? So let's go up here and say public game object game over here. Say game over menu set active to true. Obviously, in our Unity, we don't actually have a game over menu yet, but we will. And when we do, we will set it to true. And when a player die here, we want to have our game controller dot game over. So, whoops. So, when our player die, we automatically, set the game to game over because that is the behavior that we want. So in our next and final workshop, we will be actually creating that game over menu. We'll fix our problems with the text. We're gonna add a few interesting things as well. So see you guys then. This workshop is officially concluded. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I'm happy to answer.